Okay, so it's 4:01, and I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee for December 12th. Is there any public comment for issues not otherwise on the agenda? No, we're all here for citizen warrant articles. Okay, we'll get to the public hearings in a second. I'll ask for a motion on the adoption of the minutes from July 9th.
Well, I have one modification. Oh.
Thank you.
So Terry, it's Joe Grouse is the Neighborhood First representative,
Joe,
please.
Joe is Neighborhood
First, yes, you had Jill Veith in the minutes. Yes,
Okay,
so that's the one modification.
okay,
And with this modification, I make a motion that we
as amended.
confirm the minutes.
Second.
There we go. There's a word.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next up, election of officers. So David Worth, as I think everybody knows, has resigned from the committee, and now we need a new chairman. So I'm going to nominate Denise to be the new chair.
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that?
What does Denise say?
I accept the nomination.
That's good. All right, so I'll just go ahead and ask for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you. You can still chair this meeting, Stephen.
All right, well, because you didn't have a lot of notice, I'll go ahead and chair the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
So let's get started with the public hearing on citizen warrant articles. Ken called me this morning and let me know he's got a scheduling conflict, so we're going to take his out of order, and then we'll proceed from the beginning of the alphabet on through as many times as it takes to get to double Z or triple A or whatever it is that we get to.
So Ken is Q and R.
Yeah, Ken is Q and R, the two CPC articles. So we'll take them in order. The first one is the transfers of the 2020 budget.
This is the 19th year that we've done the citizens article. This year, we
Should you come up to a microphone?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, could people who are speaking, please come up and use the microphone. This is being recorded, video and audio. Okay?
Do you need one over there?
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. This year, we have 17 allocations totaling $2,964,377, 9 in the category of historical preservation, 4 in the category of community housing, 4 in the category of open space and recreation, and then an allocation with respect to administrative funds. The committee received 18 applications. There was one application that the committee voted not to provide any funding to, and advised the applicant for that, and indicated to the applicant that they could come back next year if they wanted to. As to the sources of the funding for these allocations, the principal source of funding is the Community Preservation Surcharge, and this year we were advised that the Community Preservation Surcharge available was $2,388,000. We are allocating approximately $400,000 from the state matching funds that we anticipate we will receive in 2019. This is based on the allocations that we received in the past year. We think that it will probably be more, but we didn't want to know because the state hasn't been able to come through definitively with respect to their formula as to the available funds. We're allocating $22,000 from interest on the funds that sit within the CPC. What you may remember is that the way that we operate is that we make an allocation to an applicant with respect to the amount of funds available based on their application. They then have to expend the funds, and they come back to us to be reimbursed for the funds that they have expended. And the reason that we have done that is because we have an obligation to report to the Department of Revenue on a yearly basis that the funds that are awarded by town meeting have been allocated and spent in accordance with the award made at town meeting. So we have a responsibility to ensure that the funds are properly spent, and that's the procedure that we have adopted since the beginning, and it has worked very effectively for the CPC. In addition to the funds from interest, we have allocated, there were designated reserves for historic preservation, and these are monies that we would have gotten back from projects where monies were allocated and then the full amount wasn't expended. And so we asked to get those monies back, and that's sort of, you'll see that in the second warrant article we have for the CPC. It's generally not a lot of funds, although this year there's one big amount coming back, and I'll explain that when we get to that warrant article. We had $20,000 that was available from the open space account, and we went into undesignated reserves in order to be able to address the issues relative to the funding for community housing, because this year was the first year that we were providing for the payment of the principal and interest on the $5 million allocation that was made for affordable housing that was passed at town meeting. So that totals the $2,964,377. That's the sources of the revenue, and it goes to cover the expenditures that we provided for in the proposed warrant article.
Ken, can you refresh my memory on the state component, how that's gone over the past 10 years or so, and rough
well,
numbers? Is it half of what it was, or is
it started out, because we were one of the very first communities to ever do that, we had 100% match for the first 3 or 4 years, which was really incredible. And over the 19 years, we received somewhere in the area of $12 to $14 million from the state that we would not otherwise have received had we not gone forward with the CPC. This year, the match was down to about, Brian, was it about 12%? Yeah. And it had been going down. It had gone down slowly. What happened was that about 3 years ago, Boston finally woke up and discovered that there was this money there that if in fact you did this, you got some money from the state, and that made a real dent in the amount of money that was coming available. The coalition has been lobbying with the state for a fair amount of time to be able to generate additional funds that fall into the category that can be used to fund the CPC. And the step that was taken this year, in that you may have seen that the fees relative to payments at the registry were increased for the first time in 25 or 30 years. And that funding goes into the pool that should be available. There was also, as a result of the proposals from the state or the organization of all the CPCs in the state, there was supposedly $50 million additional money that was to be made available based on the budget at the end of the year, assuming that the state had additional revenues over expenses. And that hasn't been resolved yet in terms of where that has been. It's hard to say, but we think that the increase will be maybe 2 or 3% more next year than we're covered that came in this year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Again, with respect to
Can you go back for a second and explain the 115,752 from undesignated reserves? You said that was going to be used for principal and interest on the.
Well, yeah, we put that, we made that as a source for funding with respect to community housing. We have to designate in each of the allocations the sources of funds that we're using. And what was important was that we have the undesignated reserve category. We have somewhere between $500,000 to $700,000 in that category that, as a policy, we have maintained over the years, so that if in fact anything happens, a significant change, that there's funding available to be able to continue our obligations moving forward. And that had grown up to about $750,000. So we felt it was appropriate because of the increase in the amount of money that we were going to be applying towards principal and interest towards a $5 million funding, to be able to utilize a bit of that overage in terms of the allocation or into this part of the funding available.
Okay, so earlier you said that the process is that an applicant comes to you, makes an application, you fund it all or in part. and then they spend the money, and then you
Yeah.
reimburse them.
And that's been the way it's been done, except with the town. With the town, the money is available, and Brian has it. Brian keeps track of the funds that are available and tracks it against the amount of the principal and interest on the loans that we're doing. We have 3 loans outstanding, one with respect to Surcharge Path, one with respect to the playing fields, and this one with respect to the $5 million funding. And what he's been doing is applying the monies against that account, and because of the fact that it wasn't necessary to be able to do the actual bonding for a period of time, we've been able to reduce the actual amount of time that we think it was going to take to be able to pay back the full $1 million funding that would be raised. So that's a procedure that.
The $1 million, I thought this was
Well,
the $5 million.
well, no, I'm sorry. There were 3 different fundings. So the initial first one, which was $1 million funding with respect to the playing fields, that's been reduced the most. The second one with respect to Surcharge Path has again been reduced more than, it's probably going to be a shorter period to pay that back than we anticipated. The one with respect to the $5 million, again, because that hasn't been drawn down yet, that may not take the full 15 years to be able to pay that back in terms of the amounts that we're paying.
Right, but we are paying, we are making payments on that, even though the money hasn't been spent yet, the $5 million bond?
No.
Or not, so,
They're doing the same thing that they have done with every other one, even though it hasn't been borrowed yet, because there could be a project that comes up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, that we have to do a bond anticipation note for, a short-term note. And what we've done is, if the timing isn't right to borrow, we've rolled it, okay? And over the course, just use Surcharge Path or we'll do the same thing. They're setting aside what we calculated the principal and interest payment to be. And at the time we permanently borrow it, we would use whatever they've set aside to pay down what we're borrowing so that we can borrow for a shorter period of time.
I see,
Yeah.
so,
And fit within the same amount of allocation. So for the $5 million, we did a schedule that got to $350,000 annually, okay? If we don't permanently borrow it, say for 4 years, when we get to permanently borrow it, we would permanently borrow the $5 million minus how many
What we set aside.
$350,000 allocations, and we'd borrow for a less period of time.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
we worked that out, and that's really worked to the advantage of both the CPC and the town.
Great, thank you.
So I'd be happy to answer any other questions with respect to the allocations. I think many of you are aware of the process. We have applications that are due generally by the second Friday of September. We then hold hearings with all of the applicants. There's a very detailed amount of material that they have to supply. We review that. We have lots of additional questions. In most instances, because of the fact that our applicants' amount of requests is significantly greater than the amount of money that we have, they don't get fully funded. This year, with respect to the historic preservation, because there'd been a number of projects that had been going on for a few years, we decided to try and flush out those that we could close off some of those projects in historic preservation. So we were able to do that with, I think, 4 of the projects. One was still much greater than the funds we had available, so they'll have to come back next year. But again, there's no promise with respect to anything going forward. The fact is the allocation is with respect to that application with respect to that year, and what you get is what you have to spend. And if you come back to us and we don't have any funding, the fact that we've supported you in the past, while we try to be able to follow through, it may be that we're not able to.
Can you remind us who gave money back?
Yes, that's the second warrant article. And this year, we got money back, not a lot, from the town of Nantucket, from the Belvedere Field Complex, $436.95.
Okay, yeah.
But the big one was from the South Church Preservation Fund. And what we had done is we had funded the restoration of the windows, I think it was. And the application that they made was with respect to the contractor who is going to be living up to the the standards of the building code to be able to do the historical preservation. And what was amazing was that they found an off-island contractor who was able to, in fact, do that at almost half of the cost, yet meeting all of the federal and the state and the preservation guidelines. And so they were able to return to us $38,375.36, which will go into our designated reserves for historic preservation available to be used next year.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you may have with respect to this.
Nothing for me. Anyone else? No. Then thank you.
Well, and thank you for allowing to move up on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay. So we all received an email a few hours ago from the applicant for Citizen Warrant Article A. They wish to, withdraw is not the right word, but they wish for a negative recommendation from us because they don't want to proceed. So we'll skip over that and go to B, which is the same applicant. I don't see Mr. Swain here. Does anybody else want to speak on B? Is this sewer map change? Kimball Ave? No. Okay. So we'll go to C. Sorry, I don't have my list in front of me.
Oh, it's right. I have one here.
Thank you. C, the reestablishment of the Parks and Recs Department. Maria Zoda. D, Cheryl Emery, prohibit the use of glyphosate. Glyphosate? Glyphosate. It's Roundup, but I don't know how to say it. Yeah. No. Okay. I don't see Tess here. Is there anybody else who's here to speak about the grant for Fairwinds for behavioral health services? No. Joyce Karyotakis, you get that right? Curtis. Mr. Barnes, you'd like to speak on that one?
Curtis Barnes. I submitted the application for Joyce. She is Dr. Roberts' assistant, and she wants to add her property into the sewer district. The properties, this runs off Hinsdale Road. There is already a line there, and the properties on either side are already in the sewer district. That would allow her to build a second dwelling for her kids. So that's the purpose of that article.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty
Fine.
simple.
Yeah, our process is to wait for the sewer commissioners to go through their
Understand.
checklist.
I'm
and-
just
yeah, but thank you.
reporting to you why it's there, and I'm putting it in for her, and I'll be back with mine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Prohibiting roundabouts near the school. John McGrady Jr. Anybody else like to speak about prohibiting roundabouts near the school? I imagine you do, but not today. That's fine. I think I see Mr. Wieners here. You'd like to speak about grant for ambulance transport services?
And Stephen, I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
So, I'm Walter Wieners, and I have this citizens warrant here for the second year in a row. We've made some progress finding alternative funding sources that I wanted to mention today, but first just start and tell you how I got to the number 155. And that's because there was a 17% increase in mental health patient transfers for the hospital over the last fiscal year. And concerning those, 10 were under the age of 24, 5 were under the age of 16. So it's a definite shift into teenage years that I don't think we've seen before. So the average cost of transportation was $5,000, and for the first ambulance company, times the number of transports in the past, that brings us to 155. So, and beyond that, The hospital's maintaining now 2 rooms built for mental health patients. There's going to be another $10,000 in Steamship Authority cost, and we'd expect the number of transports to go up again for a variety of different reasons, some good, actually. So those are the overall circumstances. There had been some efforts to raise alternative funding. One of those was the hospital going to Mass Health, and they put together a supplemental fact sheet, one of which was in the information I submitted, and one of which I can either give you now or hand in as a supplement. In a prior year, we had a small donation from a foundation here, and the state representatives allocated $20,000 for patient transfer. This year, that amount was $40,000, and confirmation today that it's going to come through, and directly to Nantucket, and not through Martha's Vineyard as it had in the past. So that brings us to the moment, and in so many words suggest that ask for a positive motion of 115, and expect the hospital to use the first 40, and then draw down the 115 as necessary, as a amendment or modification to the original warrant.
Mr. Winters, could you remind us, is there an entity or a nonprofit organization here that's providing this service of taking behavioral patients from Nantucket to facilities on the mainland?
They are.
Is there an organization here that is sort of managing this transportation?
No,
Slice?
it's a private for-profit mainland-based ambulance company with a contract to come over in exchange for cash, and that's the only terms and conditions.
Right. But you're not. Do you work for the hospital? Are you?
No, right now I'm an independent
Just
citizen.
volunteer on
I've
this?
been chair of the Behavioral Health Task Force for 3 years. So, but that's a coalition and not a legal entity.
Okay. And prior to last year, I remember we had these discussions, and we did, at the town meeting allocated, what, 100,000 or so? Was that?
Is it 125?
110.
110?
Yeah.
Prior to last year, this was just absorbed by the hospital? Is that the cost of transporting these patients, did the hospital just absorb it, or did we raise charitable funds, or people paid privately, families paid? How are these transportation, how is it funded? How do people get it?
So that was, it's actually very complicated, and we were just talking about it an hour ago, because none of the people that were involved are here now. But I might turn and ask Jason to address that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Graziade. I'm the Public Information Officer for the hospital. Just to give you some background on this. So your question was prior to this?
Prior to last year, when I remember this came up before the FinCom. I just don't remember how it worked prior to last year's request for.
Yeah, so in years past, these kinds of transports happened in a variety of ways. So it's having a conversation with our emergency department manager. And when we did have cases like this, certainly the volume has increased in recent years, so we had fewer in the past. But it would go off, patients would go off on Cape Air, on the Highline boat. And this was never typically done by an ambulance. When Cape Air stopped, we weren't able to do them on the airlines anymore. We weren't able to do them on the Highline. It was inappropriate to take these patients on the boats for a brief time Sheriff Jim Perlman stepped up and helped us with these transports, and they were being done in the sheriff's van. But really, the only appropriate way to transfer these patients is in a licensed ambulance, by a licensed ambulance company. So it's been sort of a variety of different ways that these patients have been transferred in the past, up to the point where it became clear the only way that we could do this was with a licensed ambulance company. Now, the only licensed ambulance company on Nantucket is the fire department. For a variety of legitimate reasons, they are unable to do these transfers. So the hospital, trying to sort of figure this problem out, we did have make arrangements with Cape Cod Ambulance to come over at great expense. And Cape Cod Ambulance went belly up, so we're back stuck again. Right now, currently, we have an arrangement with Coastal Ambulance Company that comes over. So, but historically, there was never, this was never done by an off-island ambulance company or the NFD.
What condition are these patients in that they can't go on the boat or they can't go on a plane?
I mean, it could be a variety of different conditions and diagnosis, but typically they are what is called sectioned and have to be transferred to a inpatient psychiatric facility. Of course, the island doesn't have one, and that's why they're also not eligible to go by Boston Med Flight, which is why these transfers have to happen by ambulance.
But are they dangerous? Or
Yes.
are they just,
Yes.
They are dangerous.
Yes.
I'm
This is
I'm Cherie Martin. I'm the interim CNO, COO.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you. And it is very important because most of these patients to be sectioned, which is an involuntary status, they are either a threat to themselves or to others. And so without a secured, locked vehicle for them to be safely maintained, they could hurt themselves, i.e. jump off a boat, or hurt someone else. And they can be quite aggressive at times. And so definitely need to have medical personnel with them to manage them and keep them from hurting themselves and hurting others.
And there's
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
facilities at the hospital to keep them safe until they reach the ambulance.
Correct. Limited time, we don't have psychiatric staff,
Sure.
but we have made what we call safer rooms, which have nothing that has ligature risk, something that they could hang themselves. The equipment is secure, so they can't use it as weapons, because that's not uncommon that they will pick up a chair and try to use it as a weapon.
Thank you.
Does somebody from law enforcement have to be with them?
Occasionally, yes, we collaborate significantly with the police department when we can't manage the patients ourselves.
So in the past, without these rooms that are newly available, Sergeant Marshall would have to take an officer off the road. They have to sit there with him.
Yeah, and we have this problem because we don't have a private ambulance service on the island.
Right.
Right, that's the problem.
Yeah.
And we're too small really.
and it's also
Yeah, if Cape Cod one failed, then they're on.
it's also a payer issue, right? If they could, do this for what they're reimbursed, they would come. But it's for them to the time that their crew is going to be, on the boat, on the road. It's
It's a lose.
for them. They're not going to come unless they're guaranteed to cover their costs.
Yeah.
Jason, last year we were told it was 72 Section 12s. What's the number that's gone to this year? You said there was an increase for that.
It was 35 transports.
Yeah, I don't know that it was 72 last year, but it has increased, and right now we're talking between like 25 to 35 per year.
So
to
21 from last year to 35 this year, so a significant increase.
And I think, just to add, I think I couldn't hear what Walter was saying in the beginning, but I think the FinCom did ask last year for us to try to find alternative funding. We did, do a significant effort with the state. We did hear today that they are going to allocate $40,000 for this purpose to help with the off-island transport. So that, I think, does show we did, really make the case to the state as well as Department of Mental Health, a number of state agencies about sort of pleading our case about this issue. And Senator Sears' office did get in touch with us today about that additional money that will be coming to Nantucket for this purpose. But again, it's not going to be enough to do this kind of volume, which is why the request is here, I think.
And I think the other thing is that Mass Health is the largest payer, and their pay is very slight. And I think it results into about 55% of our patients that need services, and so they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
So what does the situation look like if the town's not able to bridge this gap for you?
I mean, I think it's a significant impact to the hospital in terms of the money that it's cost to address this issue for patients. It's, you know, could be upwards of, like, I think that what the request is $150,000, so.
I think one of the other things, excuse me, that I think is really important is I know that this community, I haven't been here very long, but I know this community has really embraced and tried to find solutions and expand services for behavioral health. And as a result of us all collaborating together, we've gotten more people to care that really needed it. And I think we have seen the suicide rate go down. And so I think that we are positively impacting the community together. And without that money, I'm not sure that we would be that successful. And I'm not sure that everyone could get to care that they need. So I think this is kind of something we have to all work together to try to do. Nantucket Cottage Hospital is a beautiful place, but it's not a really profitable place. And so there's a limit to all the services that they can provide. And I think that this is an example of where community collaboration can really make a big difference in the community.
So what would you actually do if you didn't get the funding in terms of the patients? How would they get over it?
I mean, I would just say, this whole thing first came to our attention from Brian Piscotti, the emergency contracted officer, is largely responsible for determining who goes where he needs to go. And sometimes people are just discharged, can only be kept for a certain number of hours.
So a Section 12 can only be held for so many hours, and it requires a psychiatrist to do an evaluation to make sure that this section is appropriate, and if we can't get them to that place, then we can no longer hold them. That doesn't make them safe.
Do we have a psychiatrist on the island?
We do.
There's not one at Gosnold or Fairwinds? There's no psychiatrist?
They have no, they have telepsych services, but that's not at the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Those
even
are
the fair
outpatient,
ones,
not
one
not inpatient.
comes in once every 2 weeks on a predefined schedule, so it's not one that's
Okay,
available.
there's not one here full-time. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Robinson moved to France a couple years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And please take, these are copies for everyone.
Bleak situation.
It is a bleak situation.
Okay. Next up is zoning map change out on Ocean Ave. Kenneth Gullickson. I don't see him here. We have 3 from Arthur Reed, a sewer district map change, and then a yard sale. Don't see Mr. Reed. Mr. DeCosta's not here, but would anybody like to speak about his proposal to require a town meeting vote, or maybe just to ban altogether valet parking at the Washington Street parking lot? Somebody want to speak about that?
So just a question, so if the article is legally defective, what's our process for it?
I guess we need to ask town council if the defectiveness is something that can be remedied in a motion. Sometimes it is. Usually, as you have seen here, he'll tell us when they can be, but not always. So we should ask that question directly. Otherwise, we can have a discussion, and whatever vote happens at town meeting won't have any effect, but we can still discuss. Is Mr. Golding here to talk about the bike safety articles? Would anybody like to speak about his bike safety articles? Thank you. We covered CPC articles. I don't see Val Oliver. She has a proposal to limit the building height in the commercial Mid-Island district from 40 feet back to 30 feet. that it was a few years ago. Does anybody like to speak about that? Mr. Reinhardt, a sewer district map change at the request, I believe, of the land bank in the Hummock Pond Road, Millbrook Road area. No takers. Brian Ryder's not here. Would anybody like to speak about a zoning map change on Marianne Drive? No. Yes, he would. Okay.
Live here right now, because I live on Marianne Drive.
Yes.
Terry Norton, I live on Marianne Drive, and I just want to understand what R5 to Nantucket would do for the area. What does that mean?
Okay.
Anyone know?
Yeah, there's greater ground cover, larger minimum lot sizes, and CTEC stands for commercial, trade, entrepreneurial, and craft. So
Okay.
more business uses would be allowed than in R5.
So larger lots with bigger buildings, larger minimum lots.
Well, the lots themselves aren't going to get larger. Mr. Ryder's property in particular, maybe all of them on Marianne Drive at this point, have already been developed. I think what he's looking for.
There's a couple that aren't, yeah.
Yeah. So I think he's looking to put his property into conformance with current zoning. When all of those buildings, when most of those buildings went up, the zoning was RC2. So you could have residential and commercial coexisting. And then some years ago, they changed most of it to R5.
So what does that do for the residents that are in there?
It increases the likelihood that a commercial use will move in next door. But it wouldn't require anybody who has a home there to move or to cease, the residential use of the property or anything like that.
So if I were to resell my property, it can be sold as a residence?
Yes.
Okay.
Or commercial use.
That's right.
No.
Okay, so we'll ask planning board for a recommendation on that. Chris, do you want to speak about your parking article?
I would like to. I will accuse myself.
Okay,
Step
yeah.
to the other side of the table.
Flip around.
Thank you. And this one also is listed as legally defective. I think we must have had some confusion because I thought we were on the same page on that. But so I have the same question as Joanna, and we'll be researching how to see if it can be amended into something that would not be legally defective. There's been a lot of discussion, obviously, recently on the parking. I followed it quite closely. You may have as well in the public hearings and whatnot. And as you no doubt know, the decision was made to delay for a year the implementation of paid parking. And a lot of it was sort of rearranging the deck chairs, getting on the same page with the chief about the first half hour, figuring out how we can all go to the library still, how we hide the kiosks, but not too much. But I think the real problem from the people I talked to is the underlying premise and the notion of using fees and charging as a way to manipulate behavior. Because I think inherent in that is that falls on the backs of the local community. Because that's just the way price elasticity works. When you start to charge something to try to manage demand, you impact the people who can afford it the most, right? Pretty common sense. And the seasonal community, God bless them, the one thing they'll pay almost anything for is convenience. And if you go out to the airport on a given day in the summer, you can see just how much they'll pay for convenience. So now we're going to give them the ability to swipe, park for a long period of time. Who even knows where the credit card bill goes? They're not thinking of the next $4 or the next $8. And, proponents will say that, well, it's not really hurting the local community because for the very needy, they don't have cars. And for the rest of the local community, it's $4. It's $8. Well, the question then is, why are we doing it? We're doing it to manipulate someone's demand. And again, you're going to manipulate the demand of those who can least afford it.
Well, how important is the finance part against the demand part?
Okay, so everything I've heard, the reason we're doing it is to get from the 105% parking overcapacity to get to the 85% number,
Right.
and that the revenue is important to offset the costs. That this wasn't, we're not doing this
Buy
as
the
a way.
equipment.
Yeah, buy the equipment, buy the extra staff, and
Right.
I believe that's why it's being done. It's not being done to make money. So that's what I'm focused on, is the manipulation of the behavior.
Have
through
they shown,
charging.
has the select board shown any documentation where they've done some studies that it will affect the number of cars that come downtown? Or is this totally just somebody's whim?
No, I know they've hired consultants, Matt's here. If you're inclined to, you can. You know, yeah, you're welcome to, certainly. This guy loves talking about parking. For it, against it, he'll talk your ear off about parking.
We all talk about it a lot.
Here's my view.
generally.
They've hired consultants. The consultants have looked at this and they've figured it out. Every consultant I've ever seen come to Nantucket, you know, they will tell you, oh, we've done wealth studies, we understand the impact of wealth, but this isn't some affluent shopping mall in New Jersey. Nantucket blows all those models out of the water, in my experience. I can keep going, or do you want to?
No, that's all right.
Chairman? So, you know, there could be a reason to do it, right? We could say, economically, for the good of the island, we need to drive the locals out of town and onto the buses and make it more convenient for the summer community, because we have a threat. Because rich people in the summer can't find a place to park, so let's push the local people out and give them a place to park, which is what I believe the effect of this is. You could make that decision, but I think that is the decision, and I think that decision shouldn't fall with 3 people. It should fall with town meeting. Now, I recognize that this is part of the strategic plan, and I'm sorry, but most people I talk to really wish it wasn't part of the strategic plan, because they think it's just fundamentally the wrong direction. And I know FinCom isn't inclined to kind of get in the policy-making world of the elected board, but I think this is a case where FinCom can at least put it out there and say, yeah, this is how price elasticity works. Those who can least afford it are going to be the ones whose demand you manipulate. Those for whom can wildly afford it, if you give them convenience, they're going to use more of it. So I still have to figure out, you know, I thought we had figured out, Libby and I had some back and forth about this making a town meeting vote. I thought we decided you could do that. Further reflection, I guess, from town council is you can't do that, so we may have to, you know, I may have to ask to amend this to see if we go for an absolute ban, and apparently that is allowable. Then it's a weird race. The first one that gets it done gets to have the law. But
Well, I'll give you the other side of this. It's partly to change behavior. It's partly to raise money. The money that's raised would pay for things like increased bus service, better sidewalks, different issues like that. It might be helping us fund an RTA, helping us fund on-demand shuttles in the wintertime. The problem in my mind isn't just in the summer. The problem in the middle of the winter is cars parked there. I had a business downtown, and from experience, when the police would tow and ticket, we would do $1,000 that day. We were on Oak Street. When they didn't, we would do like $200, $300. So that's impacting the businesses down. You know, we all complain that there aren't year-round businesses. There aren't, you know, that type of business down there anymore. There can't be if there's no turnover. The cars, the spaces themselves are public property. They're not anyone's property for 8 or 10 or 12 hours. You know, how we did things 20 years ago was fine when we had 15,000 cars. We're at 32,000 cars at peak season. So if we're not going to, make changes in our traffic and charge for parking properly, what are we doing? As the board, what we're finding is that the pressure for parking has moved out to, all the way past Cliff Road, all the way North Liberty Street. There are private roads that have do not parking signs on them now. So all we've done is push it further out. Back in early 2000s, we had the police. Some people say all you have to do is just enforce more stringently. And we did that in the early 2000s. We enforced until 7 or 8 at night, and we pushed people to park on the beach down by Sales and up on Cliff, up past Cliff Road, up by Sherburne Turnpike, and that was 10,000, 15,000 cars ago. So if the police go out and enforce really strictly this summer, you're going to see a ton of tickets, and you're going to see a lot of unhappy people. Anywhere that has put in paid parking, when you first do it, people are all upset. The businesses are upset, and the voters are upset. Everyone thinks it's the end of the world. A year or two later, a lot of people say that's the best thing you ever did. The idea that it will only take, that only rich people will down
Do you
there.
know any towns that I can call the mayor and he's going to tell me that?
Yeah, I think you could call it, and there's a lot of studies. There's a lot, we've done looked at a lot of this. And so, and people will say, that this won't, that you have to change, only the rich people will get it. Well, first off, the rich people don't park for 8 or 10 hours a day down there. It's, it is the working people, which we need to find a way to balance their being able to work and do it. We need to find shuttles. We need to find possibly a parking garage. I know that's a bad thing, but how do you pay for a parking garage? The tenants that we're talking about are the, principals, is that the most convenient places should be more expensive, the less convenient should be less expensive, so people will use them. We're working on that, so and that's what happens in sort of Northampton, Mass. If you're parking right on the street in front of a business, you pay a little more. If you're working all day, you've got a shuttle lot, or you have somewhere else that you park. We don't have to, there's about 1,000 spaces downtown, give or take. To have 85% open, you have to change 150 people's minds. You don't have to change everybody. You don't have to do it for everyone. I think that if we do this, it'll be less punitive to people than it will be if we issue everybody 3 or 4 tickets each a day, and we say no more parking and rolling all day long. If you say, this is our system and here's how it works, you get a couple hours for free in these areas, and then you pay on your 3rd hour and your 4th hour, people will adapt and figure it out. And the idea of demand management is that the different times that you change, you can, like in the winter, it may not have to be 2 hours. In the summer, it will be a little stricter, and other times it won't be. So I think there's a lot of benefits to this, and I hope that you don't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater in round 1.
So Matt,
And he and I will be back, I'm sure.
So Matt, is the goal, is the metric by which we'll judge success 85%?
Yeah, you want to have 15% occupancy at any one time, in any one time. You can do it by blocks, or you can do it by individual streets.
So beyond
Availability,
yes,
yes.
15% availability with
Yeah.
the larger goal that we have high traffic, low cost businesses return to downtown. Is that the vision? Or it's
Well,
just
I'm
to
not
have
sure that will
availability?
ever happen because of the costs.
But that's what I mean. So what are we manipulating the?
Well, the one thing it would do is it would improve traffic. It would, right now, 30-40% of the traffic at any one time is people driving around looking for a place to park, and so it would help. It would help that end of things. It's sort of.
But how do you feel about the ratio of the number of cars we have to the percentage of to the population that we have in the summertime? And how has that changed historically over the past 10 years? Right? If we have 75,000 people who come here in the summertime, 60, 75,000.
I think peak from Data Project was 48, so say 50 this year.
Fine. So and we have, what did you say?
I think they found we were about 32,000 cars.
But yet 15 years ago we were 15,000
15,
cars.
18,000, yeah.
So what does that mean? That people coming this summer now have so many more cars than they used to have?
So partly, but it does, probably not. What it means is that we've built, equivalent of 200 homes a year for the last X amount of years. Every home that we build represents 2.2, 2.3 vehicles. They may not be in that driveway peak summer. They're servicing that house, they're servicing another house. And so if we're working on the premise that, we're going to build out at that existing level, 100, 200 homes a year, we're going to add those cars in. I put an article in, some of you guys know, most of you know, to limit cars 20 years ago for this reason. Passed town meeting twice, got through a couple committees in Boston, came back here to be studied at the planning department. And so it's, I think at that point we were at 15, 18,000. And at that point I wanted to limit it at 25,000 and, have some of those sellable so that there would be a incentive not to just keep adding them.
Right.
And the rationale for that was that we have some streets so you're not going to be able to change. Those streets are, historic. We're not widening, Washington Street, et cetera. And so there's certain things that we're going to have to do I asked one of the consultants 20 years ago, what are we going to do if we just use traditional traffic methods, what happens here on the island? And he explained to me, eventually you'll close Main Street you'll close Main Street, you'll have to close another street. That'll make it busier. Then you'll close like a whole part of the core like they do in Vail or Telluride or Aspen. That'll make the rest of it even busier. At that point, you will have to choose one of your streets, Washington or Orange, as a street just for buses and for taxis. You'll have an inbound street and an outbound street, or you'll have one street doing both, and everyone else will just be locked up everywhere. And when he said, that was not a vision that I thought was very, friendly for Nantucket. So,
But if on our busiest day in the summer, we have 48,000 people and there's 35,000 cars, I mean, that's more than one car for pretty much everybody,
Right.
unless we're counting kids and babies. I mean, that seems not.
Has there been any studies about Uber, like,
Yeah,
since
I was-
Uber has, because the demand for Uber is more and more every summer, and I don't know if that's been looked at.
I'm not sure that that's, not by the select board, I don't think it's.
And Uber on Nantucket is the same price as the taxis, so it's there's no advantage.
Or taxis, both, I'm talking about both.
Just more convenient.
But I'm,
But it's very, it's convenient. I definitely think people Uber to town more than they ever have in the past. People weren't calling taxis and saying, take me to town. But you do see people who want to go out to dinner and who don't want to park.
Right.
And so they take the Uber for $20, round trip, whatever, $24. That's not a bad deal.
No, it isn't.
Matt, I watched a select board meeting where we discussed this, and I would offer that part of the challenge of the discussion was, if you were to think about, like, actually marrying what Chris is saying and what you're saying, I don't think they're mutually exclusive goals. You want something sensible to be done, and you want the general population to buy into it. And when I watched it, it got all down in the weeds about how's it going to work, and how do I get my half an hour, and I can't walk, so I can't get to the kiosk. And so it kind of got hijacked, if you will, by the fact that it's being socialized well in advance of it being worked out.
Exactly.
And so what I'm concerned about in general on this topic is that it's just going to get emotionally thrown out before it can be sensibly addressed. And I think, to Chris's point, all the things that Chris raises, there probably is a good solution to it. If you go to town meeting before this is thought through, then it's automatically just going to be nope. And so, I have no answers right now, but my observation is, because people get into the weeds on this almost immediately, your first gut reaction is, no, I don't like it, let's stop it, let's
We're
hope to
great at
never
saying
have
no
it.
to things and 30 years later saying, I wish we had done it.
Well, I mean, the challenge to that, though, as someone trying to access the political system here, I find, is you go to a bunch of meetings, right? You try to get to all the
Yeah.
meetings, you try to
Yeah.
keep track of, is it this one or that one?
Yeah.
And then you go to them, and they bring, a bunch of ideas get presented, and you stand up and say, oh, wait a minute, I got a real problem with that. And they say, well, we're just working out, we're not saying anything set in stone, we're just kind of spitballing here, so don't have any objections. And then 3 meetings later, something's been voted on and it's in place. And you're like, well, what the heck happened? I mean, that's what, as I've raised this issue, I probably hang out with the wrong crowd, but universally, when I brought this around, people are like, oh yeah, give me that thing, I'm signing that thing. There was a lot of interest in it, and a lot of making sure we slow this down.
I'm actually quite in favor of the fact that the majority gets to say what they think about this and get to implement it. I just hope that we don't stop implementing anything that makes sense about changing congestion and all this kind of stuff, just because the idea is not well enough developed such that people can actually see and feel how it would feel to them if it was a sensible implementation that was kind of easy to work out.
So in that process, and you probably watched the same hearings as I did, there were a whole bunch of ideas raised, right?
Right.
I'm not an expert on this, but some people thought paint better lines. Some people thought, David's lobbying thing has an idea about loading zones. One of the selectmen said, have all the Ubers drop everyone off in front of the coffee shop in town. There are a bunch of ideas that I don't know what the right ideas are, but there are a bunch of things that can be done. Where my antenna go up is if you try to use price to modify behavior, then my antenna are up that you're disproportionately impacting the local community versus those that have the money to do it. And this is not Northampton, right? This is not a guy in a Lexus versus a student at Smith. This is our summer community and a local community that's trying to figure out where they come up with the $130,000 that the data project says you need to live here.
Well, and also just from the aesthetic perspective, right, we have this HDC, right, that is supposed to preserve the quality of how everything looks in the downtown, and I don't know about those parking kiosks.
How much money do you guys think is going to be raised by something like this?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it was, I can guess, but it would be a guess. I think it was 600 or $1.2 million, I think, in year one, something like that.
Okay.
So
Is that
net, or is that sort of gross revenue?
Oh, I'd have to,
62 million.
well, I think it was probably gross, net was probably, net might have been the 600 number, but if you look at the number of spaces, it's, they've had some projections that were a lot more than that, but I think the projections that the town put out were sort of conservative in that lower end. There were projections the consultants put out that were in the $2 million a year range. And again, I don't think it's gonna be as if we do it right, I don't think it'll, and I agree with you, we had issues, I pulled it, and I thought we should have pulled it even before we had the hearing, but I had other members that was, because I sort of saw the terrain tracks, I've been through this and run over a few times on this, and I think that I sort of saw that there were some differences between staff, particularly police and us, that had not been worked out yet, and I was sort of, and other board members felt we should go forward and have go through with it, and it kind of ended up the way I thought it was end up. There are differences that we still need to work out. We're being told that it's 10 times harder 10 times longer to do this, and you read to run the license plate readers, and then you go into the license plate readers, and you talk to those companies, you read literature, it's 900% faster, which is it? So there's differences that I'm hoping that would make life easier and more efficient, and we're being told that it's going to be a lot worse. So there's things like there that we need to get on the same page, and I think if we do, we could. And then there's issues. I don't think that we've thought enough about the neighborhoods around downtown. And there's some houses there that don't have parking, but there's a lot that do, and then they don't even use their own parking lots. They've taken their yards away and they're using them as parking lots, but they don't use it so that the cleaners can use it, or friends can park, and they park on the street. So there's other things that we have to sort of work through to make it as fair as possible.
Matt, what was the number? There's got to be a number that psychologically shows that there's going to be more parking spaces. In other words, I'm not sure 15% more parking spaces, available parking spaces, is going to slow me down from finding a space to park. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm ignorant.
Well, no, but here it was that. So I'll answer that. That's an easy
Yeah.
one. If 15% is always open, you're always going to find a place to park.
But how long is it? So it's going to cut my search by a minute and a half.
Yeah, or
And
more.
it-
More if you've gone down and driven around 4 times. I've driven down a few winters ago. I drove down and drove around the winter 3 or 4 times and went somewhere else to get soup for my wife because it was a miserable day and.
And you were closed.
No, I was closed. Luckily, it was January, February, but so it could make it.
Separate topic.
What they say is, a lot of the literature says is, if there's 15% opened on every street or on every block, there's always a place to park.
And how much is open right now?
Oh, a lot of times 0. Minus 5% on a Friday, Saturday night, and so, it's kind of which they've never seen before. So we've got as high a demand as anywhere.
I've never seen it either. I mean, I can't remember, and I drive to town like 4 times a day. I can't remember having to go home because I can't find a place to
Yeah,
park.
me neither.
I mean, it's just never
that was
happened.
that was a few years back.
Wait, can I ask about the permits? Because some people have permits for downtown, yeah? And who are those people and how much is that permit per year? Because those are year rounders that have that, right?
Well, downtown residents can get a resident sticker.
Yeah,
Right.
They're not meant to be
$50?
expensive. They're like $50.
Yeah, 50, and then but
For a year? So I thought there were a lot more
They
than
know
that.
the increase for the second, third, fourth.
Oh, yeah.
They put that in place a few years ago.
And then do
they
you as a
increased.
business owner get more of those? Like, can you have 10 of
Business
those?
owners don't get it.
They don't
They
get
don't
them.
get them. You have to
Not
have a
eligible.
resident. It's a
Well, I know
resident
people who aren't residents who have them, so I'm just
They
wondering.
must be spoofing leases. I
Black
don't know what
market.
they do.
There's a fair amount.
Yeah.
There is still a fair amount of that.
See me after the meeting. I've got a couple.
Yeah, there's still a fair amount of that.
They're just trying to get one.
There's still a fair amount that happens. Not as much as it used to be. We had some homes that had 10 or 12 stickers.
I was just wondering if that's
But-
something that could address your issue, Chris, that some people could get this.
I don't know.
Sticker.
I did want to just address one other thing that Matt said today before, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think he said that it's moving from punitive to progressive, or.
Well, I think the system we have now is a punitive system.
And so do I. The good thing is it's a little bit more of a level playing field, right? The orange tickets, everyone gets them.
Doesn't matter who you
You
are.
got to figure out the name of the woman in the family office that pays those. If you just throw it in the back of the Range Rover when they go to register it the next time, they're not going to be able to register. You have to come out here and sit with the fronds. Like, at least it takes that convenience factor and levels the playing field a little bit more. And so if you had enforcement, I think enforcement is more progressive because I think it's more a level playing field.
Matt, one other thing, have you guys looked at, or thought about, I'm sure you have, the psychological impact of Nantucket? This is Nantucket, we don't have paid parking, we don't have stoplights.
Right.
Now we have paid parking, next we have stoplights. I mean, there's something special about Nantucket now, or it's been for a long time, it's certainly being challenged. But do we lose that with something like paid parking?
That's one way to cut demand on parking. We just lose the character and then people stop coming.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Problem solved.
And I agree with that, and I don't do this lightly, or wouldn't suggest it lightly, but I think the other issue is Nantucket, how much of our specialness do we lose if it takes you an hour and a half to get downtown? Or if you miss your, if you can't drive, if you're driving through traffic for a half hour a day, you're here visiting and you can't get from one end to the other.
I don't think any of us experience
Yeah,
that.
wouldn't the anecdotal evidence suggest that people like Nantucket and continue to like Nantucket, and they come here in greater numbers every year, and that's part of the reason we talk about traffic congestion and unavailability of parking? I mean, so it hasn't proven to be a deterrent to get people here.
Yeah, well, that's one way of putting it. That would argue that we shouldn't improve anything. If you take that to its logical conclusion, you'd be saying that if people keep coming, then there's nothing to improve, we can't do anything better, and I don't agree with that.
I think you have to frame the conversation into what's an improvement. And some people would say, I would rather sit in traffic because I'm looking at historic buildings and it's not so bad than having to pay for parking.
Yeah, some would.
I think a lot of people did.
No, and it may not, but I think this is an important step myself, and so, and I think there's ways to address, sort of there's ways to address downtown workers and longer term and, and passes and things. But you can't do that unless you have the data. You can't do that unless you have a system in place, that's looking at this stuff. And when they did look at it, a fair amount of the cars that are there all day were cars that parked, came in and parked the same thing at 2 p.m, knew where they could stay, and they sit there all day, and that's the time that we're really talking about is when we have the nicest weather, when people do have an option of using, and if we, of using other modes of transportation, and if we improve NRTA and have the funds to do that, we could make this a lot better. Like, picture Nantucket, instead of saying we have to stay the way we are, picture Nantucket with free buses that everyone gets in, that are timely, run all the time, and that people, willingly use, workers and visitors. That to me would be a lot nicer situation.
Why don't we try that?
Do that.
Well, that's what this heads toward. This gets the data, gets the revenue stream. This is a step in that direction. And so, and if we went to town meeting and said we want $2 million to have free buses a year, we want $4 million for free buses a year, and we all want you to drive them, there'd be no reason to drive them. So you sort of have to walk, crawl before you walk. And so, this is a step toward that. And I think 40,000 cars isn't that far away.
Of the 32,
A tax increase wouldn't be more palatable than paid parking.
Yeah, well,
of the 32,000
We'll
cars,
see.
though, how many of those are year-round or like tied to a year-round residence? Maybe Brian knows that.
The data project's got some pretty good data right on their website about this, where they show the people versus car question, when there's more cars than people and when there's more people than cars.
Yeah, that's a cool graphic.
No, they did a good job on that.
So I
Their
think
stuff is good.
that's it. I gotta work out if there's a way to manipulate this so it's not not legally proper or whatever.
Thank you, Chris.
Figure out. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
guys.
you.
Lively discussion.
Mr. Chairman, public hearing?
Yes, please, Mr. Barnes.
You recuse yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, I'm sorry.
Okay, points for Mr. Barnes.
Curtis Barnes again. As you may have seen, I had some things to say about parking. I prefer to use the term controlled parking to paid parking. And I think, and I stand with Matt, we need to get shuttle buses. We need to turn over downtown. I hate to say it doesn't apply now. I went to the A&P parking lot the other night at 7 o'clock to buy a loaf of bread. There was not one single parking space there, of course, because all the truckers are there parking and they jump on the High Line. But Joan and I used to travel in Europe a lot. we encountered parking meters all over Europe in towns that were built long before Nantucket. And I'm not saying we should have parking meters standing at every slot up and down the street. Matt and I agree, and the chief agrees. If we enforced the parking that exists, the problem goes away. And this past week, I encountered a couple of employees of a small business when I went to the post office and I parked to get my mail. There was a slot. It happened, that was at 9 in the morning. At 2:30, I went back again, and the same cars from the same people that I saw getting out and going into their shop were in the same place. So I took a picture of the cars, and I sent them to the chief, and suggested that perhaps if the CSOs who are standing down 3 at a time, standing at the Highline Ferry, instead of moving around town, maybe 2 on each boat, but not 3 on each boat, if the CSOs would do their job, even in the winter, we wouldn't have the problem that I ran into. And then the chief responded very nicely and said, they are not aware that you can't just roll your car 2 feet and get another couple hours in the 15 or 30-minute zone by the library and the post office. And so the CSOs have been told you've got to move your car 50 or 100 feet. These people were riding around the block and their friend was holding the spot so they could go back into it. Well, that's a long way of getting around to it. I'm not even sure why FinCom is the parking commission yet. I heard an awful lot of stuff going on here today. But it seems to me that enforcement is a good way to start. I'm glad they've deferred for a year. I will continue to be very interested in the process, and I commend you for your interest as well. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Thank you. Actually, don't go anywhere, because
Am I next?
You are next up.
Oh, good. Okay.
So, tell us about the short-term rental tax cap, which, as you know, town council has determined is legally defective, but maybe correctable. So.
Well, I didn't know that it was legally defective. I thought that when this went in last year and this question came up, that that year we could not make any adjustment. But I certainly think that I would put it on the table. From my perspective, I have a cottage that I rent for $3,000 a week when my family's not using it. I get about 6 weeks rental out of it. Helps me pay my taxes. I have lost 2 rentals this year from people who were regulars who said when you're adding 10%, they're using around 10% number to 3,000. We can go to the Cape now. They won't be quite as nice. It's not Nantucket, but I can rent a cottage, a 2-bedroom cottage on the Cape for $2,000 or $2,500, and they have to pay the tax there too, but they're not coming. And what I would propose and will propose at town meeting, if I don't get a positive recommendation, is that the cap be applied only to rentals under 5,000 or under 4,000. That is, I'm trying to address the advantage of the local people who have a guest cottage, who rent it, and it helps them pay the expenses to live here. I'm not trying to waive it for the $50,000 a week houses. So as this has matured a little bit, my proposal or my amendment at town meeting will be to bring that number, any rental below 5,000 or below 4,000, just as long as my 3,000 is protected. So
what do you want the new percentage to be?
I'm suggesting a cap of 10%. My article was a cap it at 10%, which would mean 5/6 has to go to the state. That's where town council, I think, said there was no change. But Nantucket has the alternative or the option to set its own amount, and that would bring us 4.6% or 4.4% instead of whatever it is, 6%. So again, I'm looking at local people like myself who have a cottage, helps pay the rent, and helps pay the taxes. I've noticed my tax bill has escalated a little bit. And so my proposal is, let's help the people who live here who have that cottage to help pay their expenses.
So Kurt, are you making the assumption that because of this tax, you're not going to be able to rent your cottage?
Oh, no, I'll rent my cottage.
Okay.
I'll rent my cottage.
So you're looking for, basically for a privilege for people that have lower priced homes? I don't understand why you said there should be, number one, a differentiation between an expensive house and a less expensive house in the rental, number one. Number two is, I believe that rentals were good this year, and I think in all questions, I was talking about it earlier today, they look good for next year. So it certainly doesn't seem to be hurting the rental market now. I mean, not that I like taxes.
Well, I'm a member of the WeNeedAVacation.com outfit. Thank God, no Airbnb and no if you rent a house, use We Need a Vacation. You pay $250 a year to be listed. You don't pay any commissions or fees, and their studies, like the big Nantucket studies, indicate that there is pressure. I mean, as I say, I've lost 2 people who used to come and say they're going to stay in the Cape for less money. I certainly hope I fill those slots. My kids come for 4 weeks, so I'm giving it to family. And again, it just strikes me that if we're looking at what's good for Nantucket, maybe the people who live here and having a little less of a tax impact would be good for those small homeowners. That's my purpose.
Again, so you're talking about specifically year-rounders who get the benefit?
No, because year-round rental is exempt from the tax. I have an apartment building that.
Right.
Over 31 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm still confused about what you're saying. You know,
This is short-term rental tax.
but you were saying it to benefit the people that live on Nantucket.
It would, the people, I have talked to a couple of people who have town employees and others who have cottages, and they say that when they're adding 10% to their rental, the people that have rented from them before are resisting it to some extent. That doesn't mean they won't fill it with others. I'm just saying there are regulars who have been coming to my place, and 2 of them aren't coming back. And it's like parking. It's something to talk about, what's good for the community, and I'm here to help.
No, to your point, Mr. Barnes, I've heard many people say the same thing, that they lost a number of customers and they were in the under 10,000 range, and they are year-rounders and they rely on that income.
Thank you very much.
Talk to your
Barnes, have you raised your rent over the years?
My rent, I started out at $2,000 10 years ago, and I've sort of incremented it. I've capped it. I have not raised my rent in the last 3 years. I live next to the oldest house. I have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath cottage. I have had people who came here on their honeymoon and are now bringing their 10 and 12-year-old kids back. One of them is not coming back.
So, Mr. Barnes, will you work with town council to amend your
Yeah,
article
I absolutely. I don't know when and where and how to do that.
Yes.
Citizens have already worked with town council.
Okay.
And that is how they came up with their articles.
Okay.
The article in question here is defective because you cannot separate the short-term rental part from the hotel, motel, excise tax. It's one tax, they're not separate. And that's not how Mr. Barnes chose to write the article.
Okay.
The select board and FinCom are really the ones who would decide if you want town council to spend time on trying to correct an article. Some articles are not going to be able to be corrected because their premise is illegal.
Okay.
Like
Understood.
this one.
Okay. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is that because it's tied to the hotel tax, you can't separate it, therefore there's no hope.
That would be correct.
Okay. Well, that's why you have public hearings.
Thank you. Good.
But don't ever give up on parking. And by the way, while I'm at it, since I'm at the mic, Sunday is the Cape Cod Symphony bringing their Christmas Pops concert here. I'm the co-chair.
Oh, nice.
I hope you'll all come. It is the most wonderful show because I was at it last Sunday in Cape Cod, and we're giving free tickets to kids, thanks to Marine Home Center, and I gave away 25 free tickets to veterans today.
Oh, wonderful.
So I'm looking forward to seeing you all there, and you'll love it.
Thank you.
I think there's about 100 tickets left, I heard today, so.
We'll fit you in, don't worry.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Okay. For the record, I recused myself. I realized a little bit too late that I needed to recuse myself, so but I did leave. So.
Left up and left.
Yeah. Next up, zoning map change, 3 Cobble Court, Susan Odison. Conveyance of paper roads abutting. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Hi. I'm Carl Odison. My wife and I have asked for support for our article. I guess it's going to be an article. It represents no financial burden to the town. I don't know what I'm here for.
Okay. Where is 3 Cobble Court?
It's up opposite the high school.
Sally Ann Austin's thing. And,
Okay, yes. Now I remember.
I gave you guys some maps. And as you can see, our little lot is surrounded by, we're asking for a change from R10 to CN, a commercial neighborhood, which is 3/4 of the way surrounding our little lot here.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we shouldn't be allowed to make this change.
Yeah. Seems reasonable to me. We'll see what planning board has to say about it, but I agree.
Yeah.
Usually when you're surrounded by a certain zone, it's fair to be in that zone as well, so.
Okay.
Does changing to commercial CN3 afford you any particular flexibility or change in use of your property?
It would afford a more dense use of the property.
One of the uses includes apartments, apartment buildings.
I guess so.
Yeah.
We have no plans for that. Our plan might
And that's
be in a few
subject to
years to
special
sell
permit.
it.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's about it. The elephant in the room is Nantucket Cottage Hospital. They own a huge piece over here.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be used eventually for housing.
For housing,
So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Next up, conveyance of paper roads abutting 4 Morgan Square. David Callahan's not here. Next one is a bylaw amendment to support the preservation of historically significant buildings.
Where's that?
Okay. The next 2, AA and BB, are companion articles for a yard sale of East Hallowell Lane. I don't see Liz here. The next 2 are also yard sale, North Road and Sconset. Jesse Brescher's not here. Both of those typically will refer to the real estate committee and get back their recommendations, so we'll do the same here. Dave Iverson's not here. This is his proposal to restrict the distribution of free samples on sidewalks.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
I think he's talking about that one store.
Yes, where they tell you you have
There's
wrinkles.
2, there's one
Yeah.
on Center and
Yeah.
one on.
Where they attack you and everybody I know thinks that you should get rid of
Just
them.
what I needed. Somebody remind me of that.
Wouldn't the first thing to do is talk to the landlords of those 2 buildings?
I suppose.
Yeah.
Articles like this come around from time to time. Outside display of merchandise, it's not uncommon for this type
Yeah.
of thing to find its way to town meeting.
But we do have bylaw against display of merchandise outside,
Right, we do, yeah.
but we don't have anything.
They're holding it, so, yeah.
Yeah, there's no rule against pushers.
it is annoying. I mean, it'll be almost as annoying to pay for your parking and then be right in front of them.
Sure, go to the dark side.
Okay, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about that, but not today. The next two is a yard sale again at Cherry Street, but not the one that you know. It's the one in Surfside, Paper Road, that you've never used, we won't ever use. Okay, you have another sheet for me? Sorry, Peter?
Where are we?
We're up here.
HH.
Okay, this is listed as Carol Butler, and this is the removal of setback area of a lot when calculating the ground cover ratio.
It was actually Campbell Sutton.
That's what I thought. This is the next one.
Some evident confusion when the original list of sponsors was being developed by our office, because we pretty clearly laid out in the instructions for citizen warrant articles that the first person who signs is the sponsor and the signatory. However, we had a second sheet, a cover sheet that we were asking people to submit, and it listed sponsor on there. So people somehow wrote a different name.
Okay.
So that was the name that went into our original list. That has since been corrected, but I don't know that it made it into the town council sheet, so we'll make sure that it's corrected. But this is our
Yeah, and that's what I understood it to be. So that is Campbell Sutton's article. We'll be hearing a lot about that, and that'll be referred to the planning board for their recommendation and review as well. Anybody like to speak about that? No. If you'd like.
I will keep it short. This is a really terrible idea.
Okay.
Pique their interest.
Thank you.
Really, Stephen, tell us what you think.
Okay, next up's another Campbell Sutton article. This is a home rule petition to restrict against unwanted capital projects. And this is not in proper legal form, but I imagine this is going to get a fair amount of debate over the next couple of months anyway. The next one is an expansion.
I'm sorry. Can I correct something that I just said? Campbell put herself down as, she wrote on a cover sheet that she was a sponsor. However, the first person who signed the article is Carol Butler.
Okay, so who's the official sponsor? Carol Butler.
Or II and
But Campbell can
HH?
come speak on it if she wishes. I mean, yeah, whatever. Okay, so we'll leave.
For both of them, Libby, right?
I'm trying to look up the,
Like that?
Yes.
For both?
For both. Yeah.
Yep. All right, so she's back.
Okay, we've got a sweeping expansion of the plastics ban from Bruce Mandel, and we'll hear about that. Does anybody have any comments on it today? No. Cliff Williams has a couple that he's not here to speak on. Acquisition or investigation of an acquisition of an incinerator. There's some new technology out there that Cliff would like the town to avail itself of. There's a couple of problems with the article, but they seem to be problems that can be changed, can be fixed. The next one is appropriation for money to seek a legal opinion on beach access. I think this has to do with investigating rights in beaches going all the way back as far as the history of Nantucket was written. So that would be interesting to find out. Does anybody want to speak on either of those? No?
I can speak on the beach one.
Yeah, please.
This may be a result of, or is a result of the issue we had this summer with the beach closed down into the water. And not arguably, or basically the proprietors, the beaches aren't quote unquote public. The beaches, in my understanding, are private, held by the proprietors, which is now vested in the town, and they are allowed to be used by the public. And the first thing the proprietors did way back is they set aside the beaches, and they set aside the areas around the ponds, and they set aside roads to the ponds and to the common areas. This is before they adopted, so, you know, the English ownership style. That was the first things they set aside with, you know, those, you know, and they used them jointly and publicly. Nantucket, the state changed, originally the state of Massachusetts, the rules were to the high tide mark, they gave ownership to private ownership, they give ownership to the low tide mark for the public trust doctrine. When that was enacted, Nantucket was part of New York. When we came into Massachusetts, it was under our existing rules and regulations, and that was voted twice at the legislature, at the state level. And so we have some weird rules and things that are different than the rest of Massachusetts. I think over time we have kind of forgotten those. Our ponds, we own our own ponds. We had issues with fishing licenses back in the 50s. The state said you had to have fishing licenses like the rest of the Massachusetts, and they, you know, and it was actually overturned at a court level. So what we'd like to do is see, you know, what are our rights here. You know, so that's basically, I think, where he's trying to like solve this once and for all. One Big Beach was an attempt to do it sort of cooperatively with homeowners, and they could, ideally they could go and get easements, conservation restrictions and things like that, and get some positive value for something that they really kind of didn't own anyway. Unfortunately, that sort of has turned into a swap program, and, you know, and into sort of the, you know, some of the other things that it's doing. So I think, you know, we would like to know, you know, I'm not sure if, you know, we need Cliff's, you know, this article or not. We might, but I think it would be nice at some point to figure out, you know, or I think I've been asking the question the wrong way, the town council, you know, what does Massachusetts think? We're gonna get an answer. The question is, if we were to, you know, pursue how Nantucket has been for 350 years, how do we do that? If we wanna make our case, what's the best way and most likely way to do that? And I think that's sort of the tack we need to be on right now, so.
Great, thank you for that. The next one is the Complaints Committee has come back again. Okay. Then the next one up is Grant. Come on down.
Hi, everybody. I'm Grant Sanders. I'm the citizen behind this citizens article, but I work for Act Now, which is an organization, a new nonprofit organization that has sponsored this article. And the idea behind...
Are you a paid employee of Act Now?
I am a paid employee. Okay. I'm well paid. So the idea behind this article is to gather data on commercial deliveries downtown. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence that, it's pretty strong anecdotal evidence that some large trucks and a lot of small trucks try to use downtown all at the same time during certain parts of the day, and it causes traffic congestion. And so what we'd like to do is basically get transponders on some of these vehicles and take some real-time data and really understand how the traffic patterns are being affected by deliveries downtown. So this is a pilot program, and what we're suggesting, I mean, this article basically asks town meeting to ask the selectmen to work with Act Now to create this pilot program. We would work to find private funding for this pilot program to identify the technology and put the technology on some vehicles. And another part of this article is to discriminate between large vehicles and small vehicles. So you'll see in the room there's this information about vehicles over 21.5 feet, I believe it is. And you know, those are the largest big panel trucks that come downtown, and on some of our small streets they can really have an impact. I was behind 3 cars and 2 panel trucks getting ready for Stroll this past week, and they were jockeying over who was going to take the loading zone on Broad Street, and that was in the middle of the winter. In the summertime it becomes even more even more interesting. So
Well, I understand what you're saying, but what do you want to accomplish?
I want to gather data on what's going to happen.
But how do you can gather all the data you want. How do you stop a truck from making a delivery? I mean, what's the alternative?
The alternative is to keep it the way it is and just...
No. You don't. What is your alternative? What do you want to do besides collect data?
I want to give data to the town so that they can make a good decision about when large trucks can be downtown, when small trucks should be downtown.
And you understand how trucks get here?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, and they come on a ferry?
Yeah.
Okay, and then they get over here, and then they have to sit somewhere until they're allowed to come downtown? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, maybe we have enough preponderance of data to go to the Steamship Authority and say, it would be great to have a freight boat that left at 4 a.m. Could we make that happen? That would really help us downtown. There's lots of things that we could ask for that we don't have the data to back up.
Then the people who own a little store downtown have to be there at 7 a.m. to get the delivery, even though their store doesn't open until 10 a.m.
We are working with a lot of people downtown right now, a lot of merchants, and there's ways of making this article better, and we're working up until town meeting to perfect.
Listen, I'm a proponent of this in New York City because it makes sense.
Right.
Okay, I was in retailing for 20 years with big stores. I understand how it is, and we love to get our deliveries, off hours too. But I just don't think this makes any sense for Nantucket with trucks coming over on the boats. I mean, you're telling people they can't have a certain size truck and this and that. I don't understand it. But we'll discuss it more. It just seems, I guess I'm just wandering around in my mind about what you guys really want to do. And I don't see it here.
Well, we sat down with some folks at the town and asked, what kind of data do we have on trucks downtown? And the answer was zero. We don't really know what the problem is. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence, but we don't have any evidence that we can base policy on. So that's what we're trying to do, is come up with some good, solid policy decisions. It may not be trucks all at 4 in the morning. It might be big trucks from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and small trucks from 9:30 to 11. It just depends on what the data says.
Grant, have you spoken to the select board members and gotten their input saying, wow, we couldn't wait to get this data, bring it? Or what's your interaction with the select board, and what's been the reaction to the proposal of this study?
I haven't spoken to any select board members except for Matt Fee, but he's my brother-in-law and we talk about a lot of stuff. But Julia has spoken to a number of select board members, and so she probably can speak to that. She's the executive director of ACT Now.
If I may.
Julia, are you a paid member of ACMAN?
Yes, yes. So the idea of this article is there are many pieces to the puzzle of congestion, and if we could find an area that we could actually wrap our hands around and where there are fewer players, but potentially an issue. And when we sit down with folks, whether it's the town, whether it's preliminary discussions we've had with some of the trucking companies, some of the with steamship, there seems to be room for improvement. And it's a logistical, complex problem, logistically. But we think that we want to give a shot at actually making a difference. And so,
are you guys also going to look at while you're doing this and how much it's going to impact the cost of goods?
the number one concern is that businesses can operate successfully. That is the number one concern, right?
That means people have to be able to afford the merchandise.
Absolutely. Some of the ideas that I think have surfaced over the conversations we've had are ideas like flex curve. You know, so that at one point maybe an area is a loading zone, at another point during the day it turns into a parking area. What we realize from discussions is there just are too many vehicles, you know, that we couldn't have all the vehicles show up at one time, basically, right? Which is why the rubbish collectors show up very early, and then we have the trucking, the deliveries, basically. And we're not coming with an answer on this one. We're coming with, we think we can wrap our hands around this issue, and we're going to take a good crack at it. And like Grant has mentioned, we do realize that there may be ways to improve on this article. And that's what we're very much open to doing.
I feel like I have a really stupid question. What do you need the town for? Can't you just go do this study?
We could, but.
Because the town would probably just hire someone to do it.
Right, but it's so much more effective to work with the town, and so everybody has ownership of it.
Because does
So
it, like the.
maybe, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
No, I
was
know
just,
you.
maybe I'm not clear exactly what you're asking the town to do, and I'm not trying to like
The way
push
the
back, I'm just
article
trying to
is written
understand.
right now,
Yeah.
it would need to go to town meeting because it's saying during this pilot program from June 15th to September 15th, it's proposing changing the delivery hours.
Oh, okay, I thought it was
Okay.
just about collecting data. I should have.
That's the number one goal, but if the proponent
Oh,
decides
and
to
adjusting hours
alter
of
the
delivery. Sorry,
language,
sorry.
then you're right, there's a chance that, it wouldn't have to go to town meeting.
Or that you could just do a private study and collect
Correct.
data, go out, pay guys $10 to put a thing on their truck or however, I don't know how you do this, but, because when the town does things like, develop a pilot program, that sounds to me like hire a consultant to develop a pilot program, which it sounds like you could just do directly.
Yes, and so assuming that we ultimately, if the decision is not to alter delivery hours. And to
Okay,
move
so that's
forward
the
with
part
some-
that you need
That's the part
to
that
actually,
needs
okay,
to
thank
town meeting
you.
vote.
Yep, thanks.
So are you guys planning on changing the construction, or is it gonna stay the way it is?
We're working with downtown merchants right now. We're meeting with them, and obviously we found that there's probably a little room for improvement in the wording of this and maybe the structure of it. So, yeah, we're open to making this work for everybody.
I think anywhere but an island, it's a great idea. I just don't know how we make it work, but it'd be interesting to see what you come up with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may, a question, have you approached simplistically the steamship authority yet, just in conversation? Or working with?
We've approached the rep on Island, we spoke to Mr. Rainey, and
How
I
much
think
latitude they to make a change?
I was pleasantly surprised at the reception that this got from Mr. Rainey saying, the steamship clearly has its limitations. People need to understand those, which is one of the reasons that, they have to be at the table. Their probably biggest challenge is scheduling, and they have to do that ahead of time for a lot of these delivery vendors. But at the same time, it feels like, they're very open to certainly making improvements where there could be.
And from what we understand, there used to be a time when the steamship would give priority to big trucks on the first boat. And now a lot of that priority has dissolved for one reason or another. And so, maybe it's an opportunity for us to say, hey, if you were to go back to giving priority to the large trucks first thing in the morning, then everybody can get their critical deliveries right away. And then the smaller deliveries, the UPS trucks, the all the other things that come in can sort of be metered out throughout the day.
Maybe if I can follow up on your question, Peter, Mr. Rainey actually said that 10 years ago they tried something similar. And the reason it didn't sort of pan out is because no one really took it by the horns, and because it's so complex and so many players involved, that more than most folks. So it's not exactly the simplest. We didn't exactly go after the simplest issue, but the people at the table want to see it.
Who are the people at the table?
So I think the stakeholders are all interested in things improving.
The stakeholders of what?
Of who are involved in deliveries, who are involved in receiving deliveries, who are involved in, whether it's the steamship, whether it's the business owners, whether it's the deliveries.
Have you talked to Cape Cod Express, who probably brings the most trucks over of anybody? And
We've
them
spoken a little
and
bit
the
to them,
supermarket?
so they're, we're not in.
And they think
yes.
it's something that they could work with?
No, I think they would probably say that there's adjustments that could be made.
But that's part of the process.
We'll see what you guys come up with. Interesting.
Matt? I'm not paid. I have Thank you.
I think when people are making a presentation and they're a paid employee, I think it just should be
I
known.
agree with you, but I'm just,
Yeah.
and I have had nothing to do with this. I've had, some restaurant people call and complain about it, to be honest. But I think what they're talking about is something that was sort of an unwritten rule 25 years ago. I was on the Nantucket Restaurant Committee Association board when it was fairly active. And the goal at that point was to have all the trucks out of town, the larger trucks out of town by noon. And the only times you saw them not out of town was when the boats were late. And back in those good old days, they were food trucks of that size were given priority to get on the early boats so they could get in town and do all their business and get out. Now, since then, we've added more food companies and, and they're bigger trucks. Back then, there was one truck from US Food with Steve Bedian that he unloaded all by himself, and big long bed that came around the island. Now there's 5 or 6 of them, so it's it's a different dynamic. But I don't think what they're saying, what they're talking about is not unreasonable. The question becomes, how do you get everyone together to work on it? And there's we do get a lot of complaints, and Libby can talk about this with cars pulling up on Broad Street or right next to the hub, and there's some of those delivery trucks parking on the sidewalks, blocking the streets. So there's got to be, if we could find a way to improve it, it would be helpful. So.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Julia, you're next. If you want to
Sure.
stay here and tell us about ban on commercial use of gas-powered leaf blowers.
Does the board have a thing about that as well?
So this is also an Act Now effectively sponsored article. As the executive director, I am paid. And you are right that this is an article that was, this is a proposed ban on the commercial use of gas-powered leaf blowers starting December 1st, 2020. And it is something that the town has been discussing. And we did have discussions with select board members about this. And we got sort of from some folks the impression that it wasn't going to be necessarily on the warrant. And so we decided that we supported it as a small gesture to improve quality of life at the margin. And so we decided to put it forward. And this is, I think it's pretty straightforward in that it's something that's been implemented in many other places, including a lot of resort towns around the country, from, I'd say, more heavily in California, to a lot of suburbs around Boston, the Arlington, Belmont, Brookline, Newton, to Florida is now sort of the next, with some of the Keys town, Florida Keys, Key Biscayne in particular, but it's being discussed in many, many places. And so the transition has already begun to a battery-powered tool that is much quieter and has other benefits, obviously environmental benefits. The two-stroke motors are not as regulated as some of the other motors out there.
How much does a battery-powered cost against a gas one?
Pardon?
How much is the difference in cost to the gardener? who's
So
gonna have to
our
buy it?
research locally, in a commercial grade tool, because we're talking only commercial at this point, the cost and the difference of the tool itself is about $100.
How much does it cost?
So it goes from, call it, we're gonna do round numbers, but $270 to $370, okay?
What do they cost? I thought it cost more than that. That's
Well, the hidden cost, if you like, is in when you really do the switch, you have to buy the batteries.
Oh, that's not counting the batteries.
That's not counting the batteries. So the battery
Okay,
is.
answer my question. How much does it cost for the gas one without gas, but the battery one with batteries?
Sure. So the first time you buy it, right, you have to buy at least one battery, and maybe you're buying
Right, but
two
more
for
than
multiple tools.
Yeah, 'cause
Maybe
batteries
not
don't
two for
last.
each tool, but certainly you got to buy multiple
They don't
batteries,
last very
right?
long.
And you switch them from your
What you pay for.
Yeah.
right. And so the batteries, the commercial grade batteries, we looked at Steel, which is a pretty big brand locally, and those are $250 each.
And how long do they last?
We spoke to a local landscaper, a larger company, they switched 2 years ago, and they said tools are basically brand new. The outdoor power mentioned some of the batteries, the expected life is 5 to 7 years, but they haven't seen any.
How many hours did the charge last?
Oh, how long? It depends on the application. On the leaf blower, I'm not 100% sure.
No, that's what we're talking about, aren't we? Leaf blower?
Yes, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to say something
So that's
because I'm
why I
not
told you that
100%
before.
sure.
So I have an add-on question. Why are we just talking about leaf blowers?
That's my question.
So that's a
too.
great question, and I think that, you know, talking to some of the landscapers who've already switched, they actually said, why didn't you pick hedge trimmers?
Yeah.
And weed whackers.
And hedge trimmers are part of the issue, but so I guess the leaf blower is the more common ordinance out there, is my first answer. But the second part of it is it's kind of an island-wide application, whereas a hedge trimmer is really sort of geared towards certain maybe neighborhoods where they're more, they're more about, I would say
They have
Nantucket
hedges.
has less
You have to have
hedge
hedges to use a trimmer, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's viewed as maybe certain pockets that have more of an application for hedge trimmers. Our hope is that
But that seems like it would skew in your favor as far as getting something passed at town meeting. I mean, whatever. I was just curious more than anything else. I'm
Yeah.
not saying ban.
I thought are blowers louder than hedge trimmers or something? I don't
Right,
know.
and maybe there is reason. I mean, you got the big tube. Maybe it resonates more. I don't know. Maybe you have to
Except
use
hedge
it longer.
trimmers on for a
Maybe
lot
I don't know.
longer. Yeah.
You have to use it more often, I would guess.
What about, have you talked to landscapers about the time it takes for them to recharge the batteries? So
they usually
have to buy a lot of them or
chargers
they've
on
got
hand. They carry them. They carry charged batteries. They either carry, they may end up in some cases plugging in at the customers.
None of them, she doesn't know how long the battery lasts, so it doesn't make any difference to the discussion. Because if we don't, see, I don't think they last very long. I think you can get an hour maybe at the most, out of the most expensive battery.
I think the most salient data
so-
point, though, is that there is a large company locally who switched over 2 years ago and didn't switch back. So it
Who
is
was that?
possible.
I think the other salient data point is there are no landscapers here to complain about it.
Yeah, really. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so
it's not
we've-
people who complain about a lot of stuff that we'll hear a lot about on the eve of town meeting. So
May
I
I
don't
bring
know.
your attention to the fact that there's another meeting here at 6?
Okay.
Oh, good. I was
Great.
leaving anyway. So.
We're done.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
All right. So we definitely, Stephen, you're up next. We'll get through all of your things. Only 2 this year.
Only 2.
I think you had 13 last year.
We did.
Thank you very much. No, I think it was literally 13.
It was
We'll go back
13.
and check the record.
No, it was. I remember.
I've totally
I
blanked that out.
counted them. It was 1/3 of them.
Okay, so the first one is rural. Oh, you know what? I need to recuse myself from both of these. So
Okay,
I
so,
will see you guys later.
so this is the bylaw would require a special permit for the use of the lot for an event, so the residential event facility.
Yes.
Okay.
So you may recall last year I proposed a warrant article that was trying to regulate tents, which is essentially how we regulate events now. And I don't actually think that's a good way to do it, but it is how Nantucket does it. And so this year we thought about it some more. The people that asked me to work on it thought about it some more and said, why are we regulating tents as a backdoor to this issue? The reality is it's a heavily commercial use of a property that is heavily impactful on both the property and the neighborhood with no regulation whatsoever. So instead of saying you can't do it or you can do it, why don't we treat it like a use that we regulate like everything else? We regulate home occupations that might be, literally someone making a throw and selling, some yarn out of their house. Or personal services, we regulate people who have cutting hair or whatever, acupuncture, but we don't regulate using your house like a wedding factory. And these situations are very loud. They involve massive amounts of traffic. They involve, overuse of properties compared to the fire code or the septic code or other public codes for these buildings that they're in. And basically the police department can't do anything about it in most cases. Not that they aren't doing a good job, but it's not something that they can easily regulate, and the zoning enforcement officer doesn't work at 11 o'clock at night on Saturday. But if you go down to the Westmore Club or the Great Harbor Yacht Club or whatever, and they have an event, it's heavily regulated through a special permit to make sure that there's proper nuisance control for trash and noise and alcohol and parking and whatever. So if we're telling clubs that you have to have a permit to regulate these things, and we're telling home occupations or personal services or whatever, or tertiary dwellings, you have to have a permit. I'm not sure why this really heavy semi-commercial use wouldn't have a special permit, and I think that would give people the ability to say, okay, I'm going to do this at my house as a use, but I'm going to follow the rules and make sure that the public health and safety aspects are covered. So the intent here is not to ban these wedding factories. The intent here is to make sure that if they're going to happen, that they're properly followed through it.
Well, if you're limiting them to 2 in a calendar year, you are effectively banning the wedding factories.
So the limit on 2 was intended to go low with the idea that you can always go high, but if you go high, you can't go low later. Right? It's just the way it's the way it works for public notice.
So would there be an expectation that at town meeting on the floor, you may potentially amend the 2 to another number?
Yes, potentially. I mean, I don't have an expectation that I have another number in my pocket, but I did think about that number with the idea that you can always go wider.
Okay, thank you.
And are you, shoot, go ahead.
Impulsive permit, the property owner or the caterer?
The property owner. And I do want to point out that I really thought about trying not to entangle most home activities or things that aren't bothering people. So for example, if you're not having live music after 8 o'clock, you're not getting caught up in this. Or if you're only having your graduation party once a year or your grandparents' anniversary party or whatever, if you're really just having a residential use, you're not going to really try to target it so you wouldn't get tangled up in it. But if you're having multiple events at your house and you're treating it like a commercial property, then I don't know why we wouldn't, for public health and safety purposes and for neighborhood nuisances, want to try to tighten that up.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay. Stephen, any other questions for Stephen? No?
I have a question. So are you representing like a homeowners group or an individual client? Like what angle are you coming at this?
You're right. I should disclose, since you've been asking this question. I obviously am an attorney, and I've been hired by 2 different homeowner groups in 2 different areas of the island, one in the Tom Nevers neighborhood and one in...
I'm a director of the Tom Nevers Association. I don't know of any sort of groups that there are.
There are some neighbors who are, it's not a formal group, it's some neighbors. And then also by a group of neighbors who live in the Old Westmore Farm neighborhood. I'm sure neither of you will be surprised by those 2 neighborhoods.
No, and I think we've had a discussion about the Tom Neighbors neighborhood and this exact issue at this meeting before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
okay, sure.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
So the other one too?
Which is,
Rural affordable development?
Yes.
Okay. How do we skip that one?
Oh, we have to read a lot on this one.
So I'll try to keep this one simple. So the idea is to allow for development of lots in large areas in a way that is not that much more than what you can currently do there now, but enables some accessible housing and some affordable housing. So right now, if you have a 3 or 4 acre lot, you can put 3 dwellings on it. Okay, so what this would allow you to do is to cut that lot up into 4 lots, each with limited to 1 dwelling, so you're getting 1 more dwelling. But the trade-off is that each lot with only 1 dwelling, 50% of that would have to be affordable. So essentially, you would be creating 2 affordable lots and 2 smaller, more accessible lots. They wouldn't be price restricted, but presumably a 1 acre lot is less expensive than a 3 acre lot. With the idea that...
is that what you mean by affordable, that it just be less expensive?
Well, when I say affordable, I mean income restricted under the covenant.
Oh, okay. So
when I say accessible, I mean
less
expensive because it's smaller. So it is basically, if you want to compare it to a 40B only has to have 25%, and this is 50%, and this still has minimums of 20,000 square feet for the affordable lots and 40,000 square feet for the market rate lots. So, if we can't find density of 4 lots of half acre and full acre, I don't know what density is gonna be okay, but that's the idea.
How much land on the island would this apply to?
Well, a significant amount because there's so much lug 3 out there. But you're basically looking at Tom Nevers and Pocomo, and there's not a ton of where it would actually likely happen based on just where it is. Yeah.
And Stephen, the housing, the covenant program.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head, do you know what the income level that it qualifies for a covenant home is?
I believe
150.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
150.
Yeah.
So it's local affordable or workforce affordable.
That's right. Yeah. And I believe it changes depending on how many people are in your family, right?
And not
the covenant program. Okay.
And this would in effect allow these landowners to, as you say, subdivide and have 2 lots that you could sell off for whatever the current covenant home values are, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000.
Yeah, I think it's a little over 7 for a developed lot, and I think it's 300 for just a.
It's around 775 for a developed lot.
Yeah. And you could sell a vacant lot for around 3. So that's the goal, to allow for, really moderate development of rural areas in a way that wouldn't make them highly dense, but would create some.
What's an alternative?
Yeah. Some affordable housing and some accessible housing.
Still, I'm a little confused.
Sure.
So would that apply for Tom Nevers East?
Well, it would apply anywhere in the island.
So anybody,
but,
so you live in Tom Nevers East?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, and you have a 120,000 square foot lot, or
Right.
something like that. Okay.
Right. I personally don't, but yeah.
Oh,
But
an LLC does.
Yeah.
Okay. So only a lawyer would have their house in an LLC. The house next to you, same lot size.
Mhm.
Can divide that and put 4 houses on it.
If you had a 3-acre lot, the way it's currently
Right.
written, if you had a 3-acre lot, the most density you could get out of it is 2 40,000 square foot unrestricted lots and 2 20,000 or 20,000 affordable lots. So you could have a 3-acre lot turn into 4 lots, of which each would be limited to 1 house and 2 of which would be required to be covenant restricted. But you could also do a 40B on that lot and put in, you get 24 bedrooms on a AI septic system and go to town.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to what the previous owners of the Surfside Crossing property were trying to accomplish, right, without the affordability piece.
Well, it is much higher density.
No, prior to the 40B.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, when they came to town meeting prior to the 40B. So this is that tweener solution to try to.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks.
And Williams isn't here. Any discussion on RR or SS?
Nope.
No? TT? UU? Okay. VV, zoning map change. WW, prohibit obstructions on the beach. Rick is in here. XX,
I have a comment on XX. So,
you have 30 seconds.
yeah, I think it's a really high bar to tell people that they have to grant the town a liability waiver in order to get a building permit. And I think that that's likely to result in either a taking or a lawsuit, and that the town should not easily go into something like that. There's definitely a concept of, if you're going to be partners with the town and you're going to get something from the town, that you should be giving these waivers, and I get that in other situations, but just to get a building permit, I think is both unfair and a little dangerous. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. YY. Okay. ZZ. No. And AA. AA, sorry, yeah, AAA.
Very different organization.
I think so. Okay.
Yeah, really.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
That was not a fake comment.
Thank you, everyone.